So the Age of Fairy in Eurasia. Years after the corruption in Eden, after the Great Flood occurred, while it didn't necessarily cover the entire Earth, we know the flood at least affected a significant portion of the Black Sea region. It's very possible even that this is where some of our Atlantis mythos or archetypes begin as well. Possible. I mean, for years I even disbelieved such in favor of this civilization lost in the Atlantic, which there still might be. And yet this flood myth at the heart of the races that emerged from this region who were aware of this catastrophic occurrence, and then they left to find safer havens. We find old blood emerging circa 4000 BC, 3500 BC, in the power of the Sumerians as the Ubaid, a priest and king race of Sumerians, very similar to the Druid race that led the Celts. And they were led by, descended from, and later assumed the titles of themselves as Anunnaki. And moving into this territory, or eon of the Elven histories, it would definitely be beneficial to reference the Chaldean and Sumerian, Babylonian tablets that correlate with our story, in addition to like Sitchin's Book of Enki. This portion of history is especially popular in its adapted Chthonic form, which has been integrated into the Necronomicon mythos. Simon's infamous edition of the Necronomicon gives a detailed account of the Pseudo-Sumerian, Babylonian Genesis epic that kind of begins first and foremost with the Anunnaki. And what should become apparent with this comparative study from the Edaphic perspective is that these varying stories of humanoid development are generally correct. They simply start and stop at varying points and relay only a particular viewpoint or regional outlook using cultural specific terminology and themes. When we refer to the races and bloodlines of a culture, we are often singling out smaller sects from a larger population. For example, while the Celtic culture was very Elven Ffayrie oriented, really only the Sidhe and the original Druid Wizards were really a part of that bloodline themselves. We see the same situation again with the Scythian Fae among the greater Sumerian Babylonian society, or even with the pharaohs of Egypt. So it might be that the Sidhe took their name from Scythian ancestry. Actually, the word is pronounced Scythian in one version of it, and so you have she plural and Sith singular for the fairy folk of Britain and Ireland and the Celtic lands of Westland, the Gaelic languages, and then the Scythian or Scythian fairies of the Sumerian Babylonian. So when investigating the validities of Elven histories, this kind of linguistic analysis is a useful tool in making connections between cultures and following a particular aspect or tracing an origin. It's especially helpful in interpreting the ideas and terminology of developing cultures, as well as the etymology of their very language. It should not come as a surprise that the words and concepts maintained by the ancient ones would manifest in a language and tradition of the very cultures that they were affecting. Another interesting synchronicity is the use of the conical cap. Although the image has all been thrust out of the New Age idea of witches and wizards, the conical wizard's hat was used by ancient priest kings in the dragon elf traditions, Anunnaki, Egypt, very common. And one can even recall depictions of Merlin with the conical cap, often with the blue and silver stars or moons, demonstrating its representation of the higher self in the universe. Elves, fairies, gnomes, dwarves, what have you, have all been shown as having some kind of this Phrygian cap, usually standing upright or resembling a holiday elf hat or sleeping cap. And while contemporary society sees the white man as restricted to Europe, the Scythian Ubaid of the Mesopotamian Sumerians were also considered the fair folk. So at this stage of Elven development, however, the fairy race is described as dragon-like. They were humanoid, but not necessarily, genetically human fully. In fact, the Sumerian tradition record that the race of the Anunnaki is that of the dragons, and it is from this imagery that we view the Elven Ffayrie gene as the very dragon blood of kings that has been alluded to throughout the ages, and also in some mysteries that are emerging now. Returning to that paradigm of linguistic analysis, it's easy to see how these Anunnaki are indeed like the Devas and the Siths, when each of these three names and varying regional titles are really meaning, the shining ones. And these shining ones in a variety of forms emerge in the New Age mystical doctrines as the energy sought out or connected with in modern magic. Other lore indicates that the Anunnaki were similar to the Greek fates, a word derived from European fata, but just another name for fairy. In the Egyptian tradition, we find the name Awen or Anu, translated sometimes as Isis to the Greeks. And this name is based on the Greek point of view and language. It's not an Egyptian name. So, things to consider as we investigate the Age of Fairy in Europe.